I'm going to work on the eyes, and what I'm going to first do is put in the iris color. So I want to get that shape correct before I paint the darker black around it, and that's typically how you work in watercolor, by the way, from light to dark. So it makes sense to put in the lightest part of the eye first, which is this brown iris color. And just go slow. And you might want to use a smaller brush than this. A size 1 probably would be easier to control than this big old size 8 that I'm using, but you can make it work. And I paint that iris. I skip over that purple highlight that's in the eye, the reflection. And if you make a mistake with this, it really doesn't matter because you're going to paint really dark black all around it, and you can just cover up mistakes then. So don't stress too much. I'm using pure burnt sienna here. About milk consistency. I'm wiping my brush out because I want to get the excess water out, and then I even dab it out because I think I'm going to put dry brush texture over the dried paint that I have now. So this is what I mean when I paint fur in layers. See, this is my first layer that's all dry now, and now I'm painting our second layer on top of that, and it doesn't move. The lower layer doesn't move when I paint this next layer of texture. So I'm using a kind of dry brush technique, using the side of my brush with tea consistency paint, but my paintbrush itself has very little water in it. So that helps me make a texture, a dry brush texture by using the side of my brush. By the way, just know, look how ugly my painting is. Your painting is probably going to be ugly too, and it's going to be scary, especially as a beginner, to see this ugly stage. But we artists that know better have a name for it even. We call it the ugly stage. I've got a whole video about the ugly stage. It happens. It happens to almost every single painting. Don't freak out. Just keep going. A lot of what I'm doing too is just fiddling about with it and uh, getting to know this painting and where I want things. And I do that a lot. I'll just fiddle with stuff. Now his little cheek there was very pure burnt sienna, so I decided to go ahead and put that in, and then I clean out my brush with clean water, wrung it out. You saw me use my paper towel, and now I'm just softening the edges so it all blends nicely and there's no hard edge from that little blob of burnt sienna I just put. And then since I have it in my brush, I'll add it elsewhere too where it's needed. About milk consistency burnt sienna there. Get it a little darker. I dot at it too to make it not one flat burnt sienna, but just have kind of dapples of burnt sienna, I guess. All right, next we are going to use a small little tiny brush and paint the black part, the dark black parts of the eye. And this is where the fun begins because we get to start leaving the ugly stage. When you get the eye details in and really make the eye look realistic, the painting just seems to come together more, you'll see, and it feels a lot better when you realize your painting's not going to be totally ugly. But this is the time to really look closely, go very slowly, paint millimeter by millimeter here, and get the details right as much as possible. And you're working with cream consistency, lamp black, or any black is fine. It doesn't really matter. Dark mix, however you want to make your black. But I'm painting very carefully around that sliver of pure white paper because I want that highlight in the eye. There's a lot of hard edges and tiny little details in the eye, and that is going to tell the viewer's eye this is a place of interest and this is where they're going to look. So it's important to get the tiny little details here. So I'm painting very carefully around that purple triangle of highlight that I put and filling in the pupil. If you don't get this part perfectly dark, you can let it dry and put another layer of black on top of it, and I often will do that, and it will often need that. And now I'm putting that tiny little sliver of black eyeliner. Actually, that's going to be the corner of the eye. It's not going to be a sliver once I'm done with it. It's going to be a triangle. Try to look at the shapes in the eye. There's a triangle in the corner of the eye, and look at that shape and paint that shape. Instead of thinking to yourself, I'm painting an eye, think to yourself, I'm painting a triangle that is under the eye. And look at it that way, and that'll help you get your drawing aspect of what you're painting more accurate. So I'm just going very slowly and taking my time to get this drawing in correct. And then there's little slivers of white highlight eyeliner. All those little slivers, pay attention to and get those little details in, and it'll really make your painting pop and look a lot more realistic and professional than maybe you feel like you're capable of. See how it got that thin little sliver of white eyeliner under the bottom of the eye? Try to get that in your painting. It will really add a look of realism and wow factor to your painting. It's what we call the jewelry, the tiny little details that really make your painting look magical. Of course, I have a whole video about jewelry. Check out my playlist on my YouTube channel. I've got a watercolor basics that if you're a super beginner, you should definitely watch all those. And also I have a fur, how to paint fur playlist. You should definitely paint all those. There's some great basic information in there, even if you're not painting fur. There's good stuff. By the way, this is all on bone dry paper. You cannot get this detail. When you want tiny little details and very hard edges, you want very dry paper. One of the reasons why I'm going so slow is I'm looking at my reference photo so much to make sure I'm getting everything in the right place. Do you see how as this eye develops, it really draws your eye, and whereas all of this crazy brushwork just looked like a bunch of big hot mess, somehow putting this eye in just draws your eye to the bunny's eye, and it makes everything else kind of fall together a lot better. And the more we work on it and more details we put, the more everything will kind of mesh together and work together as a painting as a whole. So it's fun to kind of see your painting emerge from the ugly stage and start working together instead of looking like it's all clashing like a big, hot, ugly mess. So just know when that happens to you, it does not mean to stop. It does not mean to give up. It means keep going. Because now look at how much more together this painting looks already. So now I'm just going to continue to build my values. One of the things you start working on in these later stages of the painting is to look at all your values in relation to each other and how do they hang together in relation to each other in your reference, and do you have that relationship correct? Like, is this area darker than this other dark area, but this dark area is even darker than that dark area? You want to get it all correctly balanced like it is in the reference photo to tell the story correctly. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Pay attention to your values more than getting your colors right. So this is kind of entering the stage where we start adding successive layers of texture on the fur. We start building up some of the values, get things darker where they need to be darker. And I'm just kind of using a dry brush technique on dry paper to add fur texture here and there, wherever I think it needs to be a little darker, with some tea consistency lamp black, using my size 0 round. And I really don't need to be using this tiny little brush. I think I just had it in my hand from doing the eye and I forgot to switch to something different. So you could use a bigger brush for this. So now I've got really tea consistency lamp black. I'm just putting in the delicate contours that I see now. So I'm just adding the more delicate values. I'm using my little size 1 or 0 round, dotting at things to make it look more natural. Mixed in a little bit more burnt sienna there, but it's still tea consistency. I'm just adding a little bit more value on top of what I already have. And in general, of course, you want to paint in the direction of the fur and make your brush stroke about as long as you imagine the fur length is. Just as a general rule, using a kind of dry brush technique here, painting on perfectly dry paper, just scrumbling on some tea consistency lamp black. For those eyelashes, you are going to want a size 0. All right, this is my size 2 stiff scrubber by Royal and Langnickel. It's a very stiff brush that you can use. It's almost like an eraser, and you have to be using good paper. You can't use this brush on just any paper. Not even every watercolor paper will take it, but Arches Cold Press is great with scrubbing. And I use scrubbing so much. And I'm using my scrubber right now to erase across the line of the bunny's face so that there is a disappearing edge there. And also I can erase out some of my pencil marks. You might not know this yet, but if you paint water over pencil, it becomes ingrained in the paper and you can't erase it with a regular eraser. You got to scrub it. So I'm using my scrubber here to soften some edges too. I use a scrubber a ton for so many different things. You can paint with it and make soft edges with it. You can soften edges. Like I've got a lot of harsh edges in this painting right now. So I'm just kind of softening up here and there, making this edge right here along his forehead really nice and soft. By painting with it, I just scrub stuff up and then I have paint on my brush. So I painted his forehead a little bit and it made a really nice soft edge. So just working here and there wherever you feel like something is too harsh and you want it softer, take a scrubber to it. And if you don't scrub too much, you can always paint back over that area. But in general, if you scrub too much, you won't be able to rework an area. And even Arches, after a certain amount of scrubbing, it won't allow you to paint back on top of the paper. So just know that. But if you lightly scrub, you can still paint on top of the paper. It won't be too damaged. So I dip my scrubber in water, scrub, and then blot. That's just the general rule of thumb how I use my scrubber. See how that softens everything up? All right, now you can leave your painting without a background. Backgrounds are really intimidating. I don't know why. What is it about a background that's so difficult? But it is a place where you have to be a little bit more creative unless you exactly mimic the background that's in your reference. But here I just decided to put a light tea consistency wash of blue, and I'll also use some purples too. And then I'll scrub across the bunny that will bring some of the browns of the bunny into the background. You'll see. Notice how I don't paint the background right up to the edge of the bunny over there along his backside. I painted it right over, and that helps blend the bunny into the painting. I talk about this a lot, attaching your subject to the background, finding a place where you can make a soft edge. And by painting that blue right over his backside, that will help. And look, I painted right over, and I even scrubbed at that ear a little bit to loosen it up. You have to watch this tutorial to see what I mean. Ellen Crimmy Trent did a tutorial this Christmas. It's 2021, December 2021. Look for her abstract Christmas watercolor tutorial where she paints poinsettias. She paints them with hard edges, and then she goes back over and scrubs them all out, and it just is beautiful. So be sure to watch that video. All right, now I'm putting a little tea consistency bit here and there over the bunny as well to add interest, and see how I scrubbed over that bunny and it kind of attached that ear, it pushed it back in space, and it kind of attached it to the background, and it kind of just gave it a dreamy feel. I think I just love how that looks. So I'm painting a little bit of Winsor Violet here and there to add a pop of color. Using my 3/4 oval. By the way, when you're painting the background and you want it to be loose and gestural, you don't want to be scribbling around with a tiny little brush. Use a bigger brush. Put that purple in, then I was like, I don't like that. So I wrung out my brush and then kind of picked that purple back up out of the background because, all right, now I'm going to put a little bit more purple in that highlight of the bunny's eye, just to bring a pop of color into that area. I nitpick with my eyes so much because it really pays off, and just the tiniest little details really will make your eye look special. So I'm putting a little bit of purple on parts of the iris, and I'm getting parts of the iris darker, and that's a trick I've learned over the years. If you keep part of the iris really light and part of it deeper colored, it just really makes it look three-dimensional and like it's wet and glistening. Continuing to balance out my values by getting what I need to get darker. See how this is buckling? This is what I mean by buckling. And during this stage, I love to do this, is get some water and splat it on there. And it makes these little atmospheric cauliflowers in the background that I think look so dreamy. And it's just a personal preference that I think it looks cool. So I like to use cauliflowers in that way to make kind of an atmospheric look. Sadie was meowing her head off. My son was playing in the background, so I had to mute my sound, and now I'm doing voiceover, but my cat was just meowing like crazy. All right, now we're going to put the jewelry in, what's called jewelry, the final little tiny details that really make a painting look so special. And you don't want too much jewelry, just like a woman doesn't want to wear too much jewelry, you just want a little bit. So you don't want a zillion whiskers, you just want one here and there to really bring out the realism, to trick the viewer's eye into seeing they're seeing these tiny little details. They must be seeing the whole thing must just be really realistic and amazing. It's a great illusion to create as an artist, to put in these sweet little details. So I'm using a very long bristled rigger that's really thin. It's probably like a size 0. And I practiced. You see that practice piece? Even I practiced these strokes, and I learned from practice that the first few strokes had too much paint in them, and I get a better stroke anyway if I get a bunch of strokes out of the brush and then make the whisker. So I'm glad I practiced it because my whiskers look a lot better just from practicing there on my paper. And I practiced on good paper, notice, because if you practice on just a piece of like printer paper, it's not going to react at all. It's not going to teach you anything. But look how those whiskers just really add some wow factor. Do you see what I mean? And then I'm doing a little bit of scribbling there with some black, kind of being experimental, kind of trying out this new idea that I've seen another artist kind of just scribble, put little scribbles, and somehow it just adds this interesting texture. So this is something I'm playing with. You don't have to put these scribbles if you don't like them. In a minute, I'm going to get my gel pen and do some gel pen scribbles. So just know if you want to scribble with me with your gel pen, white gel pen, get that ready too, because that's coming up. So I'm just playing here. I always experiment in almost every single painting I do. I would be bored if I didn't. Sometimes it works out, and sometimes it makes me sad because it ruins a painting. And signing my name here. It's kind of hard to sign your name with this long of a rigger. I wouldn't really recommend it. I think a size 1 or 0 round. Sometimes I even sign with my size 8 round. This is a good time for any artist. I don't know, care how long you've been painting, to put it on a forum, see what other people think, ask what does this need, look at it upside down in the mirror, look at it online, take a picture, and just look and see what it needs. See, I'm scribbling with the white gel pen. I've never done that with gel pen on a painting. This is the first time I've ever tried it. I'm just experimenting. I've seen other artists scribble like this, and I just was like, that, I don't know why, but that just looks so cool. So I tried it. You don't have to do this part. I put a little extra glint in his eye while I was at it, and I liked that little glint. Now I'm feeling for how dry it is, and it's still actually a little wet, so I ended up going and blowing this dry, getting some very tea consistency blue over there. I decided I didn't like how stark that white was in the background behind his eye, so I decided to fill it in myself. I myself didn't really like how that looked. I thought it was too stark looking. So I kind of scrubbed at his cheek a good bit to kind of attach right there to the background. See how I scrub across that edge? It is scary to do that, but so often when I do that, it looks so dreamy and it really looks cool and it pays off. And here I'm just darkening some of those darker areas in the fur that tell the architecture of his body. Kind of dry brushing it too. Getting some more burnt sienna color. Just kind of punching up his fur down in there. I could toy with a painting forever at this stage. I just felt like his lower body needed a little bit more oomph and value there. Getting a little red mixed in to get a little pop of color just here and there. That's mixed with burnt sienna. I'm putting a little tiny bit in parts of the iris, not the whole iris, because I want part of the iris to be really light. I made a little mistake, so when you make a mistake like that, add water to it and then blot it up. Don't just let it drip and then blot it. It'll stain the paper worse. Just add water immediately to dilute it and then blot. Be careful when you remove your tape because paper will tear. I find that especially the hot presses, and the way to get around that is to blow dry your tape to warm it up and to activate it, and then it will not tear your paper as badly. Arches will never tear. Arches cold press, 140 pound. I mean, knock on wood, I've never had it tear ever. But other papers certainly will. And I could keep messing with this bunny, but I'm really happy with it. And for a beginner level tutorial, I think this is a great place to stop and be happy with what we've accomplished. The eye looks so good. Look how wet it looks. I just love it. And I love that little, what do you guys think about that scribbling I did with the gel pen? I think it looks kind of cool. I don't know. It just adds an interesting aspect of texture. I like it. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. Post your paintings either on my Facebook watercolor workshop page or here on the community tab here on Patreon. I'd love to see your paintings. And that is it for this tutorial. I will see you next time. Go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.